we are live streaming this because we just had so much interest, which is really gratifying. And so we do have several people who have asked, how to learn more. They're watching it as a webcast right now, and they're also checking in on Twitter for those folks who use Twitter. And so we may do a recap later this afternoon about some things that may have come across the Twitter feed there. Maggie Severns, our program associate, has been live tweeting the event for us, as well as handling the microphones. And as I said, we do have a change in our schedule for the lunch today. So just to remind you, we are going to flip two things. We had originally planned to have Stephen Hicks and Roberto Rodriguez talk now and then have Christie Cowers give her presentation. We are flipping those because Roberto's not going to be able to be here until a little bit later. He should be coming in within the hour here. So we are going to move straight to Christie's presentation. I thank Christie for being flexible on that, and thank you, Stephen, as well, for your flexibility in that. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to introduce Christie, and then she's going to give a presentation. We'll have a good amount of time for question and answer within the presentation. At about 12:45, 12:50, I will come back up and I will introduce Stephen. And as he's speaking, Roberto may come in at that point, and he'll be coming up to the table here. And both of them together will then address our questions after that. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Christie, who has become a good friend over the past couple of years as I've been learning myself a lot of the policy landscape here. Many of you know Christie, I'm sure, but if you don't, she's the program director for the pre-K third education, at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and for many years was running institutes there that some folks in the room probably been participating in. She also is a national expert on kindergarten and policies around kindergarten, and we have her paper up on the table outside. If you haven't picked that up yet, her latest one that looks at policies around full-day kindergarten, which, as Christie may talk about a little bit in her presentation, is really an under-addressed area, and it's often kind of a forgotten piece of how to build this continuum. People assume that kindergarten is just, of course, everyone has kindergarten, and aren't kids all in it? Well, maybe not. So Christie can talk a little bit about that. So thank you very much, Christie, for having time today, and I will turn the table over to you.
I have to say it's both really intimidating and really fun to be in this room because it's in front of a lot of friends and good mentors, and I think it might make me more nervous because of that. So Lisa, in the original sequencing of the day, I was to come right before the round tables because what she really has asked me to do is to try and put some structure and some organization to a lot of what you've heard so far. So while I'm presenting now, I want you to keep my framework thoughts in your brain, even when Roberto and Stephen talk. So, as I said, I've been asked to try and put some boundaries and some mechanisms into this whole birth through age 8 or prenatal through age 8 spectrum. And so what I think it's all about is really getting more specific and more strategic about how we're doing things. I should also note, Lisa originally said no PowerPoint. Anyone who has seen me speak knows that I am a visual learner and I really need diagrams and pictures to help paint the picture. So I insisted on breaking the rules and having a PowerPoint, and I hope that it will ultimately be beneficial for all of us. Those of you in the birth to 5 world in particular, maybe the K-12 folks in the room are not quite as familiar with this. This has become sort of a symbol of the comprehensive early childhood work going on across the United States, with the child and the family at the center, but then these overlapping systems of care that need to be better aligned and working together. We have early care and education, or early education, sort of that's where the K-3 side also would rest, family support and parent education, mental health, healthcare, and medical home. I think this is a vision that we all need to own and embrace. I, though, also don't believe that policymakers think this way, nor do I believe that policy is made this way. You do not have omnibus legislation that ensures every child prenatally through age 8 has a medical home, has high-quality teachers from pre-K through third grade, has mental health consultation when needed, and that their families have stable economic supports. You just do not have a single piece of legislation that does all of those things. But we all know that all of those things are important. So what I think we need to do is start getting more strategic and more specific about the different kinds of alignment efforts and the different kinds of alignment work that happen within that broader version. Because any alignment effort cannot be all things to all sectors and all systems and all children and all families at all times. So what I've done is I disengaged those ovals from the last slide and turned them on their end so that they look like surfboards, or since I'm from Colorado, snowboards. Although I did break up the education and care system into two separate ovals, because I think much of the discourse this morning has already shown that we don't have a unified system of early care and education yet. We really are talking about silos. So I have these 5 surfboards or snowboards that I think are the systems that are part of this comprehensive birth to 8 or prenatal to 8 system. I then think we can put along the y-axis their children's ages. So these systems are serving children from birth through age 8. That dotted line there is sort of where kindergarten starts. That's the demarcation between, sort of the K-12 world and thinking about children in a more universal system, and below that is the birth to 5 realm. So I want to be really clear which alignment efforts I am talking about right now. And I am talking about pre-K through 3rd models that try to span the education system and the care system for 3-year-olds through 8-year-olds. And I want you to notice that the care system is not just during those pre-K years, because something that has not interestingly been mentioned yet today is that the care system also includes after-school programs, summer programs. Where are kids spending their summers? Were they before school, after school? There's an entire care system that our 5 through 8-year-olds are experiencing that is outside of the realm of K-12. Now, they might be a little too faded, but I want to restate this does not mean that I don't recognize those other domains, the important work that's going on in those domains, the need for alignment across these other systems, or for infants and toddlers. I am holding my model within a bigger vision. So how do I define pre-K through 3rd? This is my definition. There's a lot of pre-K through 3rd people in the room that may or may not use this one, so I will own this one. It's the continuum of learning that spans the pre-kindergarten years. And I have to be, again, stop here. I use pre-kindergarten as sort of an adjective rather than a noun. Pre-kindergarten are all of those programs, those learning-based programs that children experience before school. Head Start, child care, family child care, school-based pre-K. So that full realm, to me, is pre-K and extends through the early grades, kindergarten through 3rd grade. So this is just a better definition of my pre-K, is that we need to be thinking about the feeder patterns into kindergarten. Kids are not coming to kindergarten just from school-based pre-K, but they're coming from all of these other programs, which is why we need to be caring about them as well. Pre-K through 3rd education, I believe, and actually this is the premise of all of the institutes we hold at Harvard, has 3 primary goals. The first is, I think, the most obvious, perhaps, which is that it is during these pre-K through 3rd grade years that we really need to be developing children's foundational cognitive skills in literacy and communication and in math. The second primary goal, though, is that these are the years during which we need to be developing social and emotional competence in young children. This is, going back to all of those surveys of Fortune 500 CEOs. They believe they can teach their employees the knowledge that they need to be successful in their job, but they cannot teach them how to work in a team. They cannot teach them how to be self-motivators. They cannot teach them how to negotiate conflict, etc. So these are really the years where it's also really important to lay the foundations for social and emotional competence. And then the third primary goal is to establish patterns of engagement in school and learning. This is not just the attendance issues that Hetty raised earlier, but this is a little bit of approaches to learning. Are kids learning to love to learn? Are they engaged in learning? And really, because frankly, if you just look at that table out there, we should all be learning every single day, picking up resources, constantly absorbing new information. Are we developing those habits in children? But this is also patterns of engagement for families. This is making sure that families are playing an active role in their children's learning. So these are the three primary goals of pre-K through third. All right, so again, here's the picture of what I'm talking about, trying to hold it in the bigger vision that of the full comprehensive birth to 8 system. And I should just quickly note, my doctoral dissertation was on P3 at the state policy level. And I did this very interesting methodology where I engaged very high-level state policymakers, governors, lieutenant governors, chief state school officers, chairs of Senate and House education committees in sort of a focus group process. And nearly 90% of them believe that the P in P3 should stand for prenatal, philosophically. So our state policymakers get the big vision too. But they also made it really clear that you don't make policy prenatal through third grade. So they sort of helped me actually craft this image that we need to be figuring out how to hold the big piece, but then find really specific strategies within it that they can act on. Okay, so one of the questions that came up on the last panel was, we need to be more specific about what alignment means. So first we need to talk about what we are aligning. And I think there are a few essential time continuum that we need to think about. First of all, obviously those pre-kindergarten years. We need to be thinking about the programs that our 3- and 4-year-olds are in. We need to be thinking about full-day kindergarten. And I intentionally do not say kindergarten. I think we have incontrovertible research now that children must be in full-day kindergarten. The fact that we have the state of New Hampshire just debated in their legislature revoking the necessity that school districts offer kindergarten at all, not just full-day kindergarten, kindergarten at all. I think it's a travesty that we're still living in this day and age where full-day kindergarten is not a universal right for all children. So I think the full-day K year is very important. The other one that, frankly, I didn't hear very much about this morning either is grades 1 through 3, is that to assume that we already have good things going on in those primary grades, or the right things going on in those primary grades, or the right teachers in those classrooms, or the right interactions or practices in those classrooms, is we're being rather delusional. In fact, I can say I now run a pre-K through third listserv. If anyone is interested in joining it, I'm more than happy to give you the address for it. But literally within the last 24 hours, a request went up to see what kinds of assessments people are using in grades K1, 2, 3. I have been stunned at some of the responses. Stunned in a couple of ways. Some of them were used, and I hope I'm not implicating anyone in the room. There's great resources in the room to help you fix your assessment systems. Some of these, you scroll page after page of the different kinds of assessments that are being done to our primary school children. Others, the instruments that they're using are a little questionable. None of them, I think, have yet mentioned class in a systematic manner. So I think to assume that we sort of know what's being done in those grades and are confident that's being done well, as I said, is delusional, and we really need to be focusing more on those grades. I also think that a focus on these grades for 2nd and 3rd grade is the antidote to this albatross of a word, fade out. Some of us in the room like to use it. Others of us have asked those of us that do like to use it to stop using it. But I think the question is not whether or not children are experiencing fade out, but why they are. What is it? And I think it's because we are giving children very high quality preschool and kindergarten experiences, and then we are not ensuring that they stay in a high quality first, second, and third grade classroom. And so pre-K is not an inoculation for lifelong success. It is a really important foundation, but we do need to be paying attention to those grades 1 through 3. I do want to also put in the birth to 3 here, because I actually do think many of the strategies that I will be talking about can easily incorporate much of the birth to 3 world. But if you'll notice, it's a little lighter gray and it's italicized, because I do think some of the challenges are harder in birth to 3. But these are the key components that we need to be thinking about on a time continuum basis in terms of alignment. So all I did was just take those and turn them into an arrow now. So each level has its own color and its box. So what we need to be thinking about is one version of alignment is horizontal alignment. And that's making sure we're doing things right within each of those age continuum. So the hardest work, or some of the hardest work, is in those pre-K years. And I think that's a lot of what's been talked about so far right now. Getting childcare and Head Start and pre-K and family childcare to start having a more unified standards, to start thinking more about teacher quality issues, the full array of teacher quality issues. So those pre-K years, it's a pretty Herculean task to get horizontal alignment there. But I also don't want to underestimate the importance of horizontal alignment in these upper grades as well. I recently did some site visits in an unnamed school district in an unnamed state where I had the opportunity to visit second grade classrooms. I visited 4 classrooms in the same school, and the differences between what was going on in those classrooms was shocking in terms of just room setup, sort of the way desks were arranged, the way children's time was used, the way work was displayed on the walls, the kinds of work they were doing. It was radically different. And in talking with the teachers afterwards, they all have really different perspectives on what their job is as a second grade teacher. So I think there's some really important horizontal alignment issues as well, and making sure that we have a second grade that functions as it should in this bigger continuum, and third grade and first grade in kindergarten. So horizontal alignment is getting things right within each level. But then if we turn it on its end and think about it as a ladder, we also need to be thinking about vertical alignment and making sure that we are building this sensible progression of learning and development for young children. So this is making sure that we have things aligned across the age or grade levels. So those are 2 kinds of alignment that I think are important, again, in terms of thinking sort of conceptually about time and space. But now we need to, no, I should stop real fast. This is another one of my favorites in thinking about this vertical alignment, is the difference between building blocks and pop beads, you know, those big pop beads. We can do a lot of good work in building blocks. We have a super great pre-K program for little kids. Nice building block. Then we put together a really nice full-day kindergarten program, another building block. Then we really focus on the professional development for first grade teachers, another nice building block. If you stack those up, anyone who plays with kids know that they either topple over often on their own, or some rascally little kid comes and kicks them over. We need to be thinking about ways to make those good blocks a little more coherent. So we need to be thinking about them as pop beads. That's where that alignment piece comes in. That's when we're assuring that pre-K is setting kids up for what they're going to need in full day K. Full day K is setting them up for what they need in first grade. And there are some common threads that hold it together in a continuum. But pop beads are also flexible. I'm not saying this needs to be a rigid, strict curriculum, really prescriptive standards across the full-time continuum. There is flexibility, but we need those continuity pieces. Okay. But what needs to be aligned? So now we can sort of think about the big concepts of alignment, but what specifically needs to be aligned? We have done a lot of thinking on this at Harvard, and we have now 8 buckets. Sorry, New Jersey, I know you have the old 9-bucket version, but it's very similar. We have sort of 8 buckets or categories of this pre-K through third work that we think are important. The first one is not first by mistake. It's actually first because we think it's the most important. And that is that we need some kinds of mechanisms for this cross-sector alignment, whether it be governing entities in the big formal sense, like the Department of Early Learning's, the Early Learning Plan in the state of Washington, where they have formal documentation of, governing and accountability strategies, or if it's simply a task force at the school level where there's a handful of people dedicated to making sure this topic is raised consistently, continually, and intentionally. So governance, strategic plans, some of the financing strategies, there need to be some mechanisms for actually doing this alignment work. That's the first category. The second, which was already touched on this morning, is thinking about administrators and leaders, or leadership. And this is not just looking at superintendents and principals, but boards of education. I was really glad that came up earlier. This is also thinking about child care directors and Head Start directors. A lot of leadership is exerted in sort of the policy realm. This is, chief academic officers, and, think about your central office people that really can be a barrier to this, or they can really be a supporter of this. So we want to be thinking about administrator and leadership quality. The third is thinking about teacher quality and teacher capacity. And this is not just sort of the notion of credentials and degrees and professional development, although we do think those are probably the cornerstones of this bucket. But really also, looking at what kind of dispositions do they have, and are they experiencing? Are they having the ability to create their own professional communities? Now, again, this is an interesting time to think about those vertical and horizontal alignments. If you think horizontally, do teachers have the chance to build a professional community with their peers, other second grade teachers, for example? But also, is there a chance for professional community to be built vertically, where the pre-K teachers are talking with the third grade teachers and understanding what that continuum approach is? Bridget, I thought your example of talking about the infants all the way through third grade was a great example as well. It's really important for us to see that we are all doing the same work. The fourth bucket of work is around instructional tools and practices. This gets to curriculum content, the alignment of standards and curricula, and sort of some of the pedagogical methods. These are the instruments of teaching that are being used in classrooms. The fifth is looking at the environment in which instruction is occurring. And are we creating student-centered learning cultures for children? And this is both a classroom variable, but also one of my friends and colleagues at Harvard, Stephanie Jones, has done a lot of work around thinking about buildings and campuses as safe, supportive places for young children. Where in school buildings do kids feel most unsafe? Bathrooms. Anyway, so how are we thinking about the environment in which we're asking children to learn in? The sixth is around data and assessments. And this is making sure that data and assessment are used judiciously for the right reasons. So there's a whole bucket of work under data and assessments. I'm cognizant of the time, so I'm going to speed up just a little bit. Engaged families is our second bucket. Making sure that we have families and communities engaged in student learning. And then the eighth one is intentionally last as well. The eighth bucket is around what we're calling transitions and pathways. And transition I think has been talked about a long time. Bridget and Bob Pianta have been leaders in this field. It's often been narrowly defined as sort of the transition from pre-K to kindergarten. As they have argued, and others, we need to be thinking about transitions much more holistically. But I have also become really painfully aware of this notion of pathways, is that we have a number of districts and states that are doing good work in aligning systems. They have aligned standards, they have aligned curriculum, they have aligned professional development. But nobody's thinking about the children's pathway through an aligned system. So for example, this is one of the biggest ahas. You can have a perfectly aligned system on paper. You can have a 4-year-old who is in a very high quality, full day Head Start program. And when that child turns 5, he goes to a half-day kindergarten program. That's not a very good pathway for that child. They might have full-day kindergarten classrooms, in another school in the district, but that child doesn't get to go there. So we need to be thinking about our children experiencing the aligned system. Because if they're not, then frankly, I don't want to go about all of this alignment work. It's really hard. Ultimately, I want children to be gaining the benefit from it. Okay, so you put the pieces together. Bear with me. Okay, so if we think about this as a system, it has the subsystems, both the age levels and then those 8 buckets of work. We know that interconnections are essential. We can talk about evaluation, more than happy to do that offline. I'm not going to focus on it right now, but I do think in this work we need to be thinking about at least 3 kinds of results. Not just art, no offense to Casey and all of you that were at that reading by 3rd grade. We do need to be making sure children are reading by 3rd grade, that end result. But we also need to be figuring out how to evaluate, are we doing the right thing horizontally? And are we doing the right thing vertically? We need to be coming up with good evaluation tools and metrics that don't just focus on the end result. Okay, so you put the pieces together. It's like a slide rule. So you have the age level. I only have 5 buckets listed right here right now, only because the print gets too little if you put all 8 up. But if we think about this as a slide rule, we should be asking ourselves, do we have an effective system in place at each level? Here's horizontal alignment. Those are the pieces we need to be thinking about at each grade level, whether it be pre-K or 2nd grade or 3rd grade. But we need to be asking ourselves the questions and embracing initiatives that are trying to do this kind of alignment work horizontally. But then we also need to be asking ourselves, do we have an effective system in place across levels? So we need to be thinking about how are we aligning these specific buckets across the time continuum, so that ultimately we can be asking ourselves, do we have an effective system in place? So I should just quickly note that based on this slide rule concept and these 8 buckets, we are actually partnering with Julia Kaufman at the Center for Evaluation Innovation. Many of you may know her. In a project that I think this is very exciting because it's co-funded by Foundation for Child Development, the Kellogg Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and the Stone Foundation, to create a framework that basically does this slide rule concept. And tries to highlight what needs to be happening at various layers. And we're doing it in a nested approach. This has also come up this morning. There are alignment strategies that need to be happening at the federal level. There are. There are alignment strategies that need to be in place at the state level. There are alignment strategies that need to be in place at the district level, at the school level, and at the classroom level. So we need to be thinking about this work in terms of nested mixing bowls, because those strategies are going to be different from age to age. I can't tell you how frustrated I get when, how many classroom teachers sit and wring their hands about aligning standards. I don't frankly think that's the job of classroom teachers. I think classroom teachers need to be engaged in those conversations and contributing to those conversations, but standards exist at the state level. I think sort of aligning standards should be a primary responsibility of states, for example. So I realize this is very little. I'll quickly tell you what it is. Along the left-hand column are those 8 buckets I just described. At the top are these different nested levels layers that I told you about. We have the classroom, the school, the community, the school district, and the state. We are going to be literally creating a framework that cross-matches these and saying, okay, teacher quality and capacity, here are the most high leverage strategies at the classroom level for teachers, at the school level, at the district level, at the state level. We actually don't have federal level. I'm apologetic to say, but this is a big project already. We are going to be building this framework so that it can become a tool for the field, so that there's not going to be so much wallowing about in terms of what do you mean, what needs to be aligned, and what specifically does that look like, and who needs to be engaged. So the framework will have implementation strategies, indicators of sort of the progress along the way that we are building coherent and effective pre-K through 3rd systems. And we are also going to begin to put forth some evaluation strategies for how do we evaluate pre-K through third as a systems effort. Okay, so the takeaways, these are the takeaways for the roundtables, which will be later this afternoon. Maybe we can put this slide back up again later. I know Lisa has a couple as well. But as you were thinking about strategies, try to be really strategic and specific. What part of that slide rule are you talking about? What needs to be aligned? What are the specific leverage points? And at what layer of implementation does the work really need to occur? Is this a federal strategy? Is this a state strategy? Is this a district strategy? So really being strategic and specific. I think that's it. So I do have, I think, 10, 15 minutes for some questions or remarks, clarifications. Yes. I'm looking right into a light. I see a hand. Oh, we're waiting for the microphone, too.
Hi, Christie. Rachel Dema, National Governors Association.
Hey, Rachel.
Hi. Wonderful presentation, and always it's wonderful to have these massive reform challenges broken down into such discrete components for us to chew on. I really appreciate the visual of the slide rule with the 8 buckets and then the different components of the system. And I don't want to further complicate your very clear visual with another visual, but when I think about that, I also superimpose over that a clock with a second hand, a minute hand, and an hour hand. And if you think about the different paces at which those types of reform move, so I don't know if everyone's familiar with that metaphor of politics moves at the second hand pace. The minute hand is policy and policy making and some of those leadership development and decision making pieces, and then the hour hand is actual practice and implementation in the field.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering how has that been worked into the framework, and in terms of your implementation plan, what that might look like?
We do not have a clock superimposed. We do, I think the most direct answer to your question is there will be, let me back up a minute here. And again, I know that this is just visually, bear with me. Within each cell, so if, let's say we're talking about, how to affect teacher quality and capacity at the school district level, these strategies will be prioritized. So what is either based on good sound research, this will be an evidence-based or evidence-based and evidence-informed framework. What either research tells us is really high-potency strategies, or what we're fairly certain are really high-potency strategies because we're seeing them work out in the field, will be the top strategies. Those that we're less certain about or that might be harder to accomplish will be a little lower down. We're also thinking about sort of a shading schematic where we can shade certain parts of cells or certain cells to sort of really highlight the most potent or the most strategic efforts. So I don't know if that totally answers your question. We also really hope that this kind of framework can become a tool for those very conversations, is that at least if you have sort of a menu or a universe of strategies to choose from, that as a early childhood advisory council or as a school-based task force or as a whatever that mechanism might be, you can use the framework to set your own goals and priorities and sort of say, well, knowing what we know right now about the political situation and our context, what the policy landscape is, and budgets now would be another one, then the field itself, site by site and sort of effort by effort, can make those prioritizations.
Hi, Christie. John Paul Bianchi, Kellogg Foundation, and
nice
formerly of the Colorado Children's Campaign, so you have a kindred spirit here.
You like the snowboards, too,
I did like the
you?
snowboards, actually. I missed that aspect of living in Colorado. But my question is around the kindergarten piece. So you mentioned full day K, and I'm going to drop some names that you're going to know here in this conversation because of the whole Colorado thing. But I think one thing that I'm assuming was implicit in there was quality full day K. Because we've had these conversations back when I was in the state around saying, there are legislators. In fact, the president of the Senate said, well, I want my legacy to be full-day kindergarten for Colorado. And when you actually pinned him down and said, well, are you okay with having 36 kids in a classroom for one teacher? Yeah. He said, yeah, sure, it's full-day K, right? And so having been an advocate and now being on sort of the other side of the coin, that's a really important distinction to make, is that it's not just full day K, because if you say that, that means a variety of things, but quality full day K that mirrors what those kids are getting in pre-kindergarten. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make, because that really could be the linchpin of where fade out sort of hits the peak or does not hit the peak.
Absolutely. And there obviously will be, some contextual pieces to the framework itself, but I should have explicitly stated that one of the foundational presumptions of the framework is that any work that appears on here reflects what quality practice is for the age level. I mean, because I would also say that's not just full day kindergarten. It goes to first, second, and third grade as well. Somebody talked about developmentally appropriate pre-K classrooms, and I leaned over to who I was sitting next to and said, and we need to be talking about what a developmentally appropriate second and third grade classroom looks like. So it's not just, the answer is yes to kindergarten and all of those others as well. But quality is, you can't layer too many metaphors one on top of another. But quality sort of cuts through every single bucket, every single age level.
Right.
That's
well, so the question becomes an strained budget, right? If I can do quality half-day K versus, bad full-day K, what do I do? Right?
Well, this actually goes back to some of the policy conversations we had in Colorado. For those of you that don't know, I worked for the governor of Colorado, 2 different governors in Colorado. One of the conversations that we had around this, it goes back to that pathways piece again, is that as policymakers, we might need to be starting to make some really tough decisions of, okay, in limited resources, do we want our most at-risk children to be guaranteed a full-day pre-K and a full-day kindergarten? And we recognize that that means a lot of other kids might not get full-day K. But beginning to think about how can we target funds for what's best for children. And I do think there's some interesting research coming out on this sort of dosage, this dosage factor. And I do think that our most at-risk kids need the most time. And so again, you can't be all things to all people at all times. If I had to pick, I think some of the hard strategic policy decisions are thinking about those pathways for kids and making sure our most at-risk kids have the first shot at the strongest pathways.
Hi, Christie.
Hi, Kathy.
Kathy Grace with the Children's Defense Fund, and I would just like to continue this full-day kindergarten piece for a moment. I know over time, back in the 80s, as a matter of fact, Mississippi was actually able to have state-mandated full-day kindergarten, which may surprise many of you in the room because normally you don't think of Mississippi as doing something progressive, particularly back in the 80s. However, in recent work, since I've been here at the Children's Defense Fund and through your guidance and other people's, really looking at what our K-12 system is about, and I would say that probably most of you in this room, unless you're a real student of full-day kindergarten, would not realize the disarray that kindergarten is in. We have very, I guess I could say, a continuum of what people are defining as kindergarten, plus whether or not the length of day is also going to be consistent with the length of the first grade day, and the funding mechanism for the K part of the K-12 system, whether or not, even if it is a full day, if it's funded at the level that the first grade through 12 is funded. So given those pieces of information, I think also the conversation should begin to include the Common Core standards.
Good.
We have Common Core standards for kindergarten children. Some of us may not necessarily like some of the standards there. Some of us may endorse them and say that they're good. But the context in which we're talking about right now, I think, is the architecture of the K-12 system. And so it affects, to me, professional development with the discussion earlier today, what expectations will be placed on teachers and children if you're looking at a 2.5-hour instructional day, basically, to see that children are going to master these benchmarks or these standards that have been put in front of them. So I guess I am going to continue to put the discussion forward and just to ask the question, how long can we choose to not be as aggressive, perhaps, as we should be on this full-day kindergarten discussion.
And for those online, this is Lisa with Early Ed. So the full-day kindergarten piece is something that we were struggling with as well in terms of whether it should be required of those schools that are showing such low performance that they are eligible for school improvement grants. And in our paper that we just put out last week, which is 12 ideas for the 112th Congress, we put forward the idea that if you are a school that is at that point that you are getting a school improvement grant, instead of it just simply being a permissible activity to be permitted to use those grants to do full-day kindergarten, maybe they should be actually required to have full-day kindergarten if you're at that low of a performance level. And I would love to hear some feedback on that as well, perhaps later through the day. But I just wanted to put that idea out there. So, but Christie, go ahead.
I actually was just going to augment that a bit, saying that I know that there are additional sort of policy conversations going on with ESEA's pending reauthorization and others about how to start linking in this full day K as a desirable. The feds have been really clear that they cannot mandate states do anything around full day kindergarten. There are many who are beginning to say, but let's start making, if you do offer full day K, you get extra points on your Race to the Top grant, on your, whatever. Again, there's a bevy of proposals out there right now, but really starting to think about how the federal government can start leveraging implementation of full day K through some of these other funding sources. I see a hand in the back, and there's a couple up front here too. There's Maggie.
Thanks. This is Betty for people that aren't in the room. You talked about your slide rule.
Yeah.
Christie, and this may be a preview of your publication, but you also mentioned not by accident the first requirement, the first cell was governance. What are some of the other weighted cells in your slide rule?
You mean in terms of sequencing?
In terms of being most impactful. And maybe you don't know that
I
yet.
don't know that yet.
Okay.
Is the most honest answer. We hope that we will be able to discern what some of those weighted cells are. It came up, I think it was in Shelley's panel first thing this morning. Governance has sort of been a come lately to, I think, a lot of these conversations. I think it needs to start being one of the first things, is how are we building in, and any of you who know some of my governance work with Dr. Sharon Lynn Kagan from Teachers College, we have a pretty strict understanding of what governance is too. And this may irritate some. We don't believe that early childhood advisory councils, for example, are really true governance. They are an excellent body for doing coordinating and collaborating and coming to some consensus, but not very many of them have very much authority or accountability for actually changing things in the system. So governance, true governance, should come with accountability and authority. That being said, we recognize, governance will have different definitions depending on what level or what layer of that nested bowl you're talking about as well. So we just think that making sure that these conversations continue. We don't want this to be sort of flash in the pan. Gosh, we got a one-time grant. We're going to do this one-time event to talk about these great things. We think there needs to be these mechanisms that make it sustainable, intentional, meaningful, and a drumbeat. So that's, as I said, that's the first. I'm not, frankly, sure we're going to necessarily come up with a template for a sequencing of how you implement this, because I do think a lot of it is going to be dependent on local context, on resources, on leadership. I mean, frankly, Betty, and it's not just because you're in the room, I think Washington State has been able to make as much progress as they have, not because of the governing bodies that are in place, but because of some really whippersnapper leaders that happen to be in power right now, including you. And, the fact that the Gates Foundation is at the table. And, I mean, there's some personalities do matter and, do influence this. So, anyway, more questions. Shelley has one. Yeah, I was going to say, Lisa, I'm just waiting for you to stand up. I'll keep entertaining questions until...
Thanks.
Okay.
And you know what I'm going to ask probably, but I so appreciate the level of specificity on really trying to get at this one particular piece of alignment. But I'm back to your snowboards, and whether or not we need to be thinking about a similar level of specificity of alignment in the areas of family support, mental health, health and nutrition, so across the snowboards, or when you're really talking about governance, to try to really put a pin in this more explicitly, is it really about this piece that must be aligned and tightly governed and accountable? And then the other pieces are more coordinated? Or how do we act? Or when we're creating a governance system around education and care, are we missing an opportunity to also pull in the health, the mental health, the family supports? Because I do find, and I agree with your premise about fade out, but I also think that, back to the old NICHD study, that 50% of kids' outcomes are really predicted around a lot of these care and education experiences, but the other 50% are social and economic status, it's poverty, it's the family situation, it's the environment. So how do we gel this without it getting so big? My head's already hurting. So big that it sort of collapses under the weight of our capabilities to then fit ourselves into this framework and then find our specific niche and how it works together. How do you think about that?
I have 2 or 3 responses to that. The first is one of my current mentors at Harvard right now, Rick Weiss, has helped me to really think about this, because I think it's often a chicken and the egg conversation. When we talk about academic success and literacy and communication and math, it wounds me when people stand up and say, well, you don't care about social emotional development in babies and toddlers. And literally, it's like getting kicked in the stomach. And so when I've had this conversation with Rick, he said, yeah, but a good response to that is one of the biggest risks to children's social and emotional well-being for their entire lives is if they cannot read by the time they hit 3rd grade. And if you think about economic success, if you think about poverty, if they can't read, they are going to be perpetuating this cycle of bringing up, it's a chicken or the egg. So I'm not sure there is a perfect entry point, but I think we need to stop being so apologetic about making sure we get academics right in this country and getting them right for our little kids. It is really, truly, especially given what seems to be happening with healthcare, really, truly the only universal system we have in this country right now is that we do know that everybody will be going through the public education system. And so that, to me, is a really profound mechanism entry point. So that's my first response. My second response is, I actually do think this kind of specificity probably needs to be happening in some of those other snowboards. Again, in my Colorado work, we actually developed a big framework that helps us to map who's doing which alignment pieces. And there are some brilliant alignment projects going on we have 2 different departments of health in the state of Colorado. Healthcare Policy and Financing, and Public Health and Environment. They are doing similar mapping and alignment strategies to figure out how can they together make sure that Medicaid works with Child Health Plan. How can they ensure every child gets a medical home? But the great thing is you then have the health representatives and the pre-K through 3rd representatives sitting in a meeting, and they can comfortably endorse each other's efforts because they know it's all part of this bigger vision. My third response, and then that'll probably be more than you wanted, is on the governance issue. And I do think we need to be thinking strategically about how we talk about governance, too. I do think early childhood advisory councils are a perfect place to be helping to hold this big vision, to paint the picture, to help everyone find their seat at the table. But I don't think they are the true governance with authority and accountability to sort of administer and run it, and because they're never going to be able to wrest the authority from state boards of education, from state boards of health. But in terms of a soft governance, keeping the vision, keeping everyone on the same page, I think ECACs, Early Childhood Advisory Councils, are a perfect place. If you are talking about true hard governance with authority and accountability, we need to be looking more at states like Washington, Massachusetts, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, what's happening in Maryland, thinking about what are the ways that we can put true authority and accountability around pieces that make sense. And frankly, all of those surfboards, birth to age 8, do not make sense under a single body with authority and accountability. They just don't. Thanks very much. If anyone's interested in the pre-K through 3rd listserv, this is my last plug. Just send an email to, are you ready? Pre-K-3RD, pre-K through 3rd, at list.gse, as in Graduate School of Education, gse.harvard.edu. And just put subscribe in the line, and you too can become part of the fun. Pre-K-3rd at list.gse.harvard.edu. Or perhaps the faster version would be just come find me. I'm here for the rest of the day, and I'll tell you again. I should have put a slide up, sorry.
Well, please join me in thanking Christie. We're going to move into the next kind of exciting part. But before we do that, I just wanted, this is me kind of thinking on the fly here and reflecting on what John Paul brought up about the quality full-day kindergarten, and even, the idea of requiring very low-performing schools or districts to have it. It would, of course, be incumbent upon folks like myself and others to make sure that policymakers know that when we're talking about even a requirement in a place like that, that we are not talking about a kindergarten that has 36 children in it. So I think that actually was a really helpful, and that's an important point that we need to keep kind of pushing, that we may have a vision of quality that seems kind of just obvious, and that, of course, everyone knows what that means. And that's one of the reasons that we're talking about all this today, is that it may not be as obvious to a lot of others, and we need to flesh out really what that exactly looks like. So it's time now. We're gonna move to a really exciting moment in the day where we're going to hear from our leaders at the federal level. And I don't know, Roberto, maybe Stephen said he's ready to kind of take on whatever's needed here, because I know that Roberto has a lot of things he's juggling at the moment. So we'll see when he comes in. But let me take a moment to introduce Stephen Hicks, who is Special Assistant on Early Learning at the U.S. Department of Education, and he works under Jacqueline Jones, who most of you in the room are probably well aware of. Jacqueline's done already, I think, some really strong and amazing work at heightening understanding and awareness of the need for thinking across a continuum. And she is the first in her position in the U.S. Department of Education. And Stephen may be able to talk to us a little bit more about that. But I think that says something in terms of how folks in federal agencies do really want to try to help communities and states figure out ways to make this happen. And I also want to say that Jen Lombardi sends her regrets and really is excited about this group of people that we've put together here, and is watching as well. So in the Department of Health and Human Services, I think that they're also very interested, and there's a lot of really interesting cohesion going on between Joan Lombardi's work and Jacqueline Jones's, which I'm sure Stephen will tell us a little bit more about. Stephen holds a master's degree in early childhood education and was a preschool coordinator in California. And I'm sure he can tell us a little bit more about his background, but one of the things that I wanted to just say personally is that I have found over the past couple of years that whenever there is an event or a conversation that's really critical to these issues, Stephen is there, and he's really listening, and he's taking in a lot of what's being said. And I think that it's just incredibly encouraging to have him with us here for the day, and to be able to hear from him now. So, Stephen, come on up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa, for that really kind introduction. I'm really, really happy to be here with this community of learners that you've created today. I look around and I see a lot of people I've either just emailed or had phone conversations with, and it's really, really nice to see them actually in person. And then people that I've met over the last couple years that I've been working at the department on this issue. And it's a little bit like coming to a family reunion. I also want to thank Lisa and, of course, New America for sharing your recent Congressional Practitioners Guide, the 12 Ideas for Early Education in the 112th Congress. I have to say a lot of these ideas come from the ESEA reauthorization playbook that we've been working on, so I hope you'll be happy to know that. We've been thinking about a lot of these ideas, but some of them are new, and we'll give them further thought as we work towards getting a reauthorization of ESEA this year. I'm also reading through Laura's report on the workforce, which is especially timely. At the department, we have worked towards an early learning agenda as part of the larger strategic plan for ed, and we've really identified 3 key goals, and one of them that's central is that workforce issue, which we know is so critical to improving quality in our programs from birth to 3rd grade. And there's been a lot of discussion today about not only the birth to 5 space, but really that K through 3 space. And I want to reiterate that we're looking at, in some of our one of our consolidated programs on teachers and leaders, about how we can infuse an early childhood professional development and pre-service for teachers and principals, so that they really have that background they need in those early years in elementary school. The other 2 issues and goals that we're focusing on at the department are around improving access to high quality programs, and thank you, John, for bringing that up about the K through the kindergarten, and people have mentioned 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade, and we are definitely focused. Dr. Jones is focused on improving the quality of not just the early learning programs birth to 5, but also the early learning programs K through 3. And then finally, we're also focused on having appropriate, developmentally appropriate, I don't know if Linda's still in the room, linguistically and culturally appropriate, comprehensive assessment systems for young children. And we have a few opportunities in ESEA reauthorization to really push for that, for looking at how we develop those for young children. So Lisa asked that I just make a few remarks and then leave time for conversation. So that's what I hope I'll be able to do today. And I really am thinking that hopefully this can be kind of a listening and learning opportunity. Last spring, Joan Lombardi and Jacqueline went on a listening and learning tour around some of those key issues, and we haven't had a chance since then to really hear from the field. And it's not often that we're able to meet one-on-one with people, but we really do welcome and encourage your ideas. And I think we have a really golden opportunity right now with this administration, because this administration is listening, and I think we really need to seize that moment. We have a president that's really has remained steadfast in his commitment to early learning and supporting young children and their families. And we also have a Secretary of Education who, over the last 26 months, has really come to change this notion at the department of K through 12 reform to P through 12 reform. And I don't know if we can understand the real significance of that, but I think it's pretty big. And if you go to our website, you can see the kind of the big buckets on the side where we talk about teachers, we talk about higher education, and then what used to say K through 12 reform now says P through 12 reform. And I think that's really, really huge at the Department of Education. While we've always had programs that meet the needs or attempt to meet the needs of younger children before entry into school, elementary school, such as our IDA programs, Early Reading First, Even Start, full service community schools, 21st Century. We have a lot of programs, but I don't think people have thought, and even at the department, have really thought of this P or birth through 12th grade continuum. And I think we have a secretary that really gets it, which I think is really great. And our team at the department working on this early learning piece, and Lisa mentioned that Jacqueline is really the first person to hold this position. I think that really says a lot about the commitment of the department, because we don't have any programs. We don't have any grants that we're administering, so we're not getting any funding for that. But the Secretary has carved out part of his budget to really support this work because he believes it. And we've had, I think, really unprecedented kind of collaboration and coordination with HHS, and have really, you've probably seen Jacqueline and Joan on various speaking engagements, the Jacqueline and Joan show. They're really quite amazing, and I think have come to a lot of agreements on how we look at children. And one of those is really looking across the multiple domains. And again, for a long time, I think the Department of Education has been perceived as only focusing on those cognitive domains, but I think this is really a new day for the department where we're really looking across those 5 domains as identified by the National Goals Panel. So we are looking at approaches to learning. We are looking at social and emotional development and physical health and well-being, as well as the cognitive skills. The Secretary has spoken that it's really not a battle between non-cognitive and cognitive skills, but that children really do need both. And I know that Roberta will talk a lot about the President's budget in general, so I'm not going to say a lot of that unless he doesn't come, and then I will say a lot about that. But you know that the agencies across the government are facing either level funding or budget cuts in this FY12 budget that the President has proposed. And it's really a responsible plan to put us back on the right track and have fiscal stability over the next few years. However, the budget is really focused on still making key investments in education, because the President knows that in order to win the future, we need to continue those key investments in education for programs that are really making a difference, and making a difference especially for young children. High-quality learning programs for children from birth to 3rd grade is really a priority of the President's, to ensure that every child reaches his or her full potential. And despite this challenging budget, the administration has proposed $2.5 billion of increased funding for young children. And that's really a conservative estimate, because at the department, we have lots of programs that can serve young children. So we're working to encourage those investments through priorities, and I'll speak to that in a moment, not only in this new budget year, but also we've seen last year how those priorities in early learning were really successful in making investments for young children early on. But we know that the success of this work really depends on building a coordinated system, and that's why we're intending to fund the Early Learning Challenge Fund, which I'm sure you've heard much about over the last couple years, and we're asking for $350 million. I know a lot of you in this room, probably everyone in this room, has really ridden this, the ups and downs of the Early Learning Challenge Fund train. It started as part of the Higher Education Act, and then later was put on the Health Care Act. And then was part of the Senate FY11 appropriations bill, and then now we're seeing it in the President's budget, which shows a real commitment to keep this. It's kind of been a little bit like the little engine that could, saying I think I can, and I really believe that next year at this time we will be saying I knew we could. And if you've seen the statements from the Secretary, you've seen that he has really put early learning as one of the top 5 priorities. That really hasn't been talked about before from the Department of Education, but he really believes that unless we put substantial investments in early learning, that we're not going to have any chance of closing, or, as my friend Adele reminds me, preventing the achievement gap. And as I said before, early learning is a really high priority of the President's and also the Secretary's. And I'll just tell you a couple things a few things where we put it in the education budget, and you should have a couple handouts. One of these is a 2-pager, and that's on the Ed website. We have about 5 different cross-cutting documents there that look across the department. One is on STEM, one is on teaching and learning. This one is on early learning, and it shows the different investments of the department. This other 2-pager is one that really looks at the overall federal investment for 2012 and what the president is proposing across HHS and the Department of Ed. So some of the other investments that we have are Part C. We're finally getting asking for an increase of $50 million, and this will really enable every state to reach this this $1 million mark, so that they can use these funds to actually spend on the continuum of children, birth to age 5. We're also asking for additional funds for Part B, which serves children with disabilities from ages 3 through 21, and that's $200 million more. And then we're continuing our kind of high-profile programs, Race to the Top, I3, and Promise Neighborhoods, that last year we had either competitive or invitational priorities for, and I'm sure you're aware of some of those programs and what we've done with those. But we're hoping to continue that emphasis on early learning, so that we encourage the field to really spend these funds and apply for these funds in innovative ways to meet the needs of young children. We have some consolidated programs. One of them is Effective Teaching and Learning for a Complete Education, and that's where I think it really spells out what the department's trying to do, which is, instead of looking at these siloed buckets of how we look at literacy or STEM or other subject areas, where we first look at birth to 5, then maybe look at K to 3, and then maybe look at the rest of the continuum, we're encouraging states to fund a continuum of learning from P to grade 12. And then we have, as I mentioned before, about excellent instructional teams, where we're trying to encourage the education of principals and teachers to really have an early childhood background. And then we have school turnaround grants, where I think it was mentioned a moment ago by Lisa, we really would want states to put an emphasis in those programs on how they spend their funds supporting young children, P to 3rd grade. In addition, besides these programs, we also at the department, the 2 departments have formed this Interagency Policy Board, which Roberto may speak about a little bit. He's on the board as a representative of the Domestic Policy Council. We also have Robert Gordon from the Office of Management and Budget, and then we have senior staff from HHS and Ed. And this policy board is really to look across programs and at the quality on the major federally funded programs, and see how we can better coordinate those funding streams, and how we can make sure that quality is high for all the children, no matter what setting they're in. So I think everybody in this room has a role to play in this P through 12 grade reform effort that we're working on at the Department of Education and Health and Human Services, along with DPC and OMB. And I hope that we can have a conversation about that in a moment. And I see Roberto in the back, so Lisa will come up here and introduce him.
Thank you, Stephen. We'll do questions of both Roberto and Stephen together. I think that might be best. So I want to take a moment to welcome Roberto and bring him up front here as I introduce him. Roberto is a special assistant to President Obama for education. We're really delighted that he's able to take time out of what is an incredibly busy schedule to be with us here today. He was Chief Education Counsel to the United States Senator Ted Kennedy. He has had a long history of working on a lot of these issues for us. And I don't want to take any more time from him and actually just kind of turn the podium over at this point, other than to say that it's been exciting to hear Roberto speak over the past couple of years about these issues, and to sense how much you really do get it when it comes to the young kids, and even at the very youngest years, including them in this effort. So I wanted to thank you for that, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to join you today, and my apologies for having to come a bit late from the White House. I'm really pleased. I'd like to begin by thanking Lisa Guernsey for her leadership here, and at the New America Foundation for all of the effort and attention and focus on the importance of early care and education policy. I think it's really critical, and very happy to join this forum. I want to thank and acknowledge Stephen for his amazing leadership at the Department of Education since day one with our administration, and really beginning to shape and forge this agenda. I'll try to be very brief. I think you've got a great outline and handle from Stephen's remarks in terms of some of the investments in the more recent budget requests from the President with respect to early learning. This is such an important part of our work and our agenda to really strengthen opportunities and outcomes for our children from cradle all the way through career. The President has forged this agenda since the early days of 2009, obviously driven by a moral imperative, in that the ability for us to really live up to our full potential as a country, to provide the opportunity and to live up to the fundamental principles around equity, around fairness, around really advancement, demands that we do better in terms of challenging the status quo in our education system and doing more to really improve opportunities, improve outcomes for our children. There's also a strong economic imperative here. That economic imperative is something that he spoke to during the State of the Union in terms of our plan to really win the future by out-innovating and out-educating our peers. We have to begin early in this work, and that's certainly been a focus for us since day one. The Recovery Act was our real first entree into early learning, and an investment of over $5 billion to expand child care subsidies to tens of thousands of children, as well as Head Start and Early Head Start to over 61,000 kids, and doing more to shore up our IDEA programs, preschool and 619. All because we know that these early years matter greatly. Moving forward, obviously we've established a robust agenda around reform in the K-12 space as well as in the higher ed space. We're very adamant about doing that in early learning as well, and the Early Learning Challenge Fund is a key marker for us in terms of reaching that objective. It's critical for us because we know all of the research shows that the quality of the environment in which our youngest children spend time matters greatly. So for us, quality is number one. It's our top policy objective in this space. We know that children that are supported with nurturing environments and with caring adults that are able to support their development and their age-appropriate advancement toward kindergarten are much better off once they reach the schoolhouse doors and through their academic career and later in life. We know that from study after study, whether it's Perry Preschool or Abecedarian or Chicago Child Parent Centers. There's a lot of research that shows that matters. There's a wonderful host of research from economists around the country showing that our investments in high quality early childhood education programs are among the soundest that we can make along the educational pipeline. We also know that we are wrestling with a school readiness gap that begins unfortunately, and manifests itself, unfortunately, as early as age 3 around vocabulary and around language and literacy development. And by the time our children are entering kindergarten, we have a gap upwards of 60 points between our low-income children and their more affluent peers. We, as our Secretary of Education often says, then are in the game of catch-up and in the catch-up business from that point forward. And we wrestle with the issue and the challenge of closing the achievement gap in the early grades, and if we can't get our children proficient by the time they're in third grade, we then have even greater challenges moving forward into the middle school years and high school years. So all of this demands a comprehensive look and a comprehensive investment in reform and in strengthening early learning opportunities across the board for our kids, regardless of where they're spending time. That's really what the Early Learning Challenge Fund embodies, is a commitment to, regardless of where our children are spending time. And we know we have over 11 million children spending time outside of the care of their parents. They may be in childcare, they may be in Head Start, they may be in state-funded pre-K, they may be in other settings. Those children need a high-quality environment to really reach their full potential so that they can get to kindergarten ready for success. So we've said, let's issue a challenge to the states, and let's establish, a race to the top for early childhood education. And let's challenge our governors to come forward to develop the types of systems that they need that are articulated along a developmental continuum and a continuum of standards, both in terms of early learning outcomes as well as program quality. Let's provide the amount of professional development and support and the career pathways that our early educators need to improve their knowledge and skills and make sure that they're well equipped to meet the needs of our children. Let's do more to provide parents the information, the transparent information that they need about the programs and the settings in which their children are spending time. We spend a whole lot of attention doing that in the K-12 space. We don't spend nearly enough time and attention doing that in these years. Let's do more to make sure that there's a comprehensive system for referral for our children, to make sure that their comprehensive needs are met, and that we're really attending to the development of the whole child and their social and emotional needs alongside their cognitive needs and their physical needs. And let's do more to ensure that we're establishing and fostering a culture of improvement, of continuous improvement in our early learning programs, a relentless focus on outcomes and in improving outcomes, and a focus on data-driven instruction and support that will really help our programs improve and move forward. And that is a tough lift in this landscape, right? Because we don't have the systems yet at the state level in many states. I'm looking at Harriet. She's built them in Pennsylvania, fortunately, but we have a long way to go still around the country in terms of developing the types of data systems that are needed to be able to collect in a continuous feedback loop the information that we need around how our children are doing, how they're advancing, and where we need to spend more time, focus more training and support to improve our programs. So that's really what the Early Learning Challenge Fund is all about. It's a critical part of our education agenda. It's a critical part of our work to advance forward and to win the future. We believe if we don't focus on quality and on improvement in these early years, we will not get ahead. So we've made important investments and advanced important reforms and programs from Head Start to Title I and beyond throughout our ESEA blueprint. And we're looking forward to working closely with Congress this year to shape and craft a elementary and secondary education act that really raises expectations and supports better outcomes for kids across the board. But we know that this is a critical part of that agenda, and it's something that we look forward to moving forward with Congress on, and look forward to working with all of you as ardent advocates in this space to move forward. So thanks again for your attention. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. So I'm sure there are a lot of questions in the room around these things. I wanted to take just a moment, if I could, Roberta, to ask you one that's related to the later grades on this continuum that we're talking about here. I heard you speak last fall. It was in one of the buildings near the Capitol or around there. It was when Brookings and Neer put out their paper on investing in children. And you talked a little bit then about the early grades, and it was one of the first times that I had heard some of that really kind of conceptualized. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that piece? We're, just to give you kind of some context for the conversation today, we are a group here that really does span everything. There's folks, the prenatal and infants and toddlers, and have a lot of focus on that, all the way up through many school districts that are represented in the room. And so we as a group are struggling too with how do you improve all these pieces? How do you make sure that really none of it's left out? But I would love to hear you talk a little bit about the early grades and what you had mentioned earlier.
Sure. Thank you. Well, I think, there's a lot that we can learn. This is nothing new to this audience. I think you all know this, but we really do believe there's a lot we can learn from the early developmental years, from the first 5 years, in terms of informing the experiences that our kids have in the early grades in K through 3. And so part of our challenge, I think, in revisiting the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, No Child Left Behind, is to think about how we can do a better job of aligning and promoting a good articulation of standards that address the whole child, not only from our early learning programs, but into these early grades, right? And the notion that our children reach kindergarten and then fall off of a developmental continuum and don't need attention beyond reading and math is just beyond a crazy notion. It's really, it does a disservice. So, I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of building some bridges between our teachers in the early grades and our public education system, and high quality programs that serve kids 0 to 5. And we want to build those bridges to promote better articulation and alignment of standards. We want to promote more robust and more thoughtful and meaningful assessment system. And we want to build a better articulation of the professional development, more than anything, that's needed for our early educators to be able to succeed, and make sure that they're delivering the robust standards in kindergarten framework, or first or second or third grade standards that they're required to deliver by the state, but they're delivering that in an age and developmentally appropriate manner, and that does require building a community of practice of educators that is not just focused at that school, but actually really includes and incorporates the knowledge and experiences of early educators beyond the school and in the early grades. We want, in the 0 to 5 space. We also want to do more to promote a sounder transition for our children into kindergarten from early childhood education programs. So there was a lot of work done by Congress just a few years back in rethinking the Head Start Act and the Head Start reauthorization to require better coordination and the development of a real plan around a meaningful transition for our Head Start children into kindergarten. We need that type of plan for all of our children. That's not something that that just 900,000 of our nation's millions of kids need. We all need that. We need that in every community. So what we'd like to see in the reauthorization of ESEA is a strong commitment on the part of our public education system to reach their hand out as well and foster a more meaningful plan and a more meaningful strategy for transition for kids, regardless of where they're coming from and spending time in. And I think, if we can develop those types of plans and make sure that we're fostering an active collaboration and communication between our kindergarten teachers and our early childhood educators in the myriads of programs that they're in, I think we'll have a better sense of making sure that we're meeting the individual needs of our kids as they come into kindergarten. So those are a few thoughts and ideas. I think the movement by the states to a set of common expectations and standards in reading and math provides an opportunity for us to really reopen this question of the type of educational experience and really the whether our kids are getting a 21st century curriculum in our schools. And that needs to be something that we look at from kindergarten all the way forward. And we hope we can get that done in this reauthorization.
I'll just add something. So the piece that Roberto was referring to, this transition piece, and I'm sure you're familiar with how strong it is in the Head Start Act that Roberto and others had worked on, and we really are examining that coordination piece in ESEA reauthorization to try to, as applicable, where appropriate, strengthen that as much. And additionally, we want Title I schools that are receiving Title I funds to really know about the children that are coming into that school. And I'm flashing on Christie's graphic up there that showed all the different places kids go. Actually, that was into pre-K, but you could use the same graphic to show where all the kids are coming from different places into kindergarten. So some are coming from private providers, some are coming from home providers, some from state preschool, Head Starts, no preschool. But we'd really like LEAs to understand where kids are coming from and kind of the status of kindergarten kids in kindergarten when they come in.
It's exciting, and I'm thinking of in the Head Start Act as well. If you talk about kind of building on what was there, it was within that. Correct me if I'm wrong. That planted the seed for the class and those kind of real interaction-based assessment tools for teachers. And I don't think I'm alone in this, thinking in this room that it would just be wonderful to have something like that applied for kindergarten, first, second, third grade as well, so that we can think about those interactions much more deeply.
I think it's a terrific suggestion. And, I think actually we're learning a lot about how the class, which is now being used across our Head Start, the framework and landscape of our Head Start programs. And our administration is really looking at how we can continue to support the congressionally mandated use of that class, but also think about how that fits into a broader focus on outcomes and on improvement in Head Start in particular. And we have a regulation that we're promulgating there around competition and programs. But I think we're learning a lot about the use of the class already in some of the early grades, where it is being used, in more of a case-by-case basis, not as systemically as it could. But again, the quality of the interaction between adult and child here is key. We're committed to focusing on improving outcomes across the educational spectrum. We can't improve outcomes in this space unless we're having a serious look at that.
So let's open it up. I know there's lots of questions out there, and Maggie will be coming forward with the mic. We'll take one back there, and then if you can see, I think is it. Yes, there we go. Thank you. And we'll bring it forward after that.
My name is Carrie Betty. I'm a principal of an elementary school, and I've taught kindergarten and first grade as well. I also just recently wrote my last check to the Department of Education for my student loans. So thank you. I would not be here today without that.
I know how that feels. It's such a liberating feeling.
But I do owe a couple thousand to Visa for my Harvard stint this summer. That's next. I have a question about teacher quality and administrator quality and how that translates into quality education for students. And I've heard talk about equity and poverty as predictors, and I'm wondering what where race comes into that dialogue, because poverty looks different across races.
So, I think it's important to take a look, to really look at the research behind this. And, we have a number of challenges. I think in this space in particular, we're looking at concentrated, what we can do to really leverage better solutions in high concentrations of poverty in neighborhoods and in schools where poverty is concentrated. And often we also know that if you look at outcomes by race, you end up seeing also disparities in, certainly from the research in the K-12 space, we see our children of color being more likely to be taught by teachers that may lack training in the specific field in which they're teaching. So, I think what we're really focused on is doing more to address these concentrations of poverty, and I think we see them. We see this also fall out on racial lines. The Promise Neighborhoods work that we're doing is one of many of the pieces here, where we're trying to launch a new continuum of services and supports for kids. Again, starting at birth. To really focus on doing a better job of making sure that our kids graduate prepared for college and continue on to college. That's our metric in that initiative. But that's just one of the initiatives we're looking at, really addressing and confronting poverty head on. And we're doing it in a lot of communities. The planning grants for that program are in a lot of communities that where they're still really wrestling with the effects of segregation in their schools, and where we're still seeing a lot of concentrated poverty in predominantly African American and Latino communities on our Native American reservations as well.
And I don't have the Secretary's priorities in front of me, but perhaps you saw them when they came out, the final priorities, and hopefully you made some comments. But there is a priority around this civil rights and equity and race issue. So what happens with those priorities is that discretionary programs then will choose from those approved priorities that have already gone out for comments, and then they can use those priorities to give extra points for grantees that would address those issues.
Stephen Dow, let's get a question from you, Stephen, and then we'll go to Cindy, and then we'll go over there. Yeah.
I'm sorry. A two-part question for Roberto. First of all, just to both, the commitment the administration's made to early learning is just extraordinary, and I think both in terms of improving the quality and the performance of the current programs and expanding those programs, and particularly in the stimulus. So the question for Roberto is about kind of the prospects for the continuation of some of that expanded Head Start, early Head Start and child care work that was done in the local communities in FY11 and beyond. And I think you weren't here this morning, but I'm particularly interested in, Stephen, your response to sort of the federal response to what at least our panel was describing as the difficulties that existing funding sources present to local communities that are trying to make braiding and blending work more effectively for at-risk families.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So on the braiding and blending issue, and I'm glad you brought that up, Stephen, because I would actually like to hear from you that are in the field, particularly people working at the state level or at the district or school level, what those barriers and those challenges are, because we really do have a concerted effort to try to see if we are the problem or where we are the problem at the federal level, which is a principle reason of why we did establish this Interagency Policy Board, and this Interagency Policy Board really grew organically out of, I think, both Jacqueline and Joan's vision of we need to do better, and states need more support. And while we're waiting for initiatives like the Early Learning Challenge Fund, ESEA reauthorization, we need to do something now. So we really do welcome what those key issues are. I have not worked at the state level, so I don't know what those are. My background is I was a practitioner myself, teaching kindergarten and preschool. I worked at the local level blending funds for our early learning program, but I don't know necessarily what those challenges are, and we do have a commitment to try to see what we can do at the federal level. So if you have ideas, that would be great.
I would just also say, I think creativity here is key, and we have so much leadership and so much, I think, to learn, as Stephen acknowledges, from local programs who do this well, so we hope to be able to bring those examples forward. We also, the Interagency Policy Board gives us an opportunity to look across Title I and IDEA and child care and Head Start and other programs, both in both ACF and ed, to really look as we have opportunities for regulatory and administrative action, how we can begin to identify things that might be bumping up against one another and breaking those down. And we're already starting to have some of those conversations that just kind of come up organically in the context of IDEA, for instance. You had also asked about sustaining some of the expansion that we saw as part of our efforts under the Recovery Act. And it's a very challenging fiscal environment, as all of you know, here in DC at this point and with our budget. And we believe we've really put forth a fiscally responsible plan that moves us forward. We've had some tough choices to make across our agencies and programs, and the president's budget also made tough choices in the context of education. We had to, for instance, in the higher education space, cut some benefits, propose some cuts to benefits for graduate students and to students that are attending school year-round, so that we're able to sustain the over 2 million additional students that are receiving the Pell Grant, and to sustain the over $800 increase that we made in that grant. So there are policy trade-offs here for us, even in the education space. One place where our budget continues to make a robust commitment, and that Stephen noted here, is the over $2.5 billion that we are investing in early childhood education and early learning across ed and HHS. We believe that these investments are critical to our future, and we don't want to see any of our children shortchanged the opportunity that they have right now to attend the types of programs and get the support that they need to be able to succeed. So we're steadfast in that commitment, and our work in moving forward with Congress will reflect the president's priorities there. We believe this is a really important expansion and a really important step forward that we've made. We want to go even further while focusing on important improvements and strengthening the quality of our programs. But we're hopeful we'll be able to find a way forward that continues to support the kids currently in our programs and Head Start, as well as the subsidies that our kids need through the child care program.
I just want to add one more thing about the blending and braiding and mixing and stirring up of funds for Title I. And someone asked this earlier today, is we are almost ready to finalize and release updated guidance, non-regulatory guidance for Title I preschool use, and I know people have been asking about that. I discovered that in Washington things take a very, very, very long time, because we've been working on this for 2 years. But we are going to release that soon, and we'll think of strategic ways to make sure that district superintendents, that state-level people, and school-level people are aware of it and have the correct information so they can make informed decisions and not feel like they might be doing something that's not allowed. Additionally, we are working on a report to identify some promising practices and innovative ways that districts and schools have used Title I funds, whether it be home visiting, blending with Head Start. You've heard a little bit of that today. If you have some good examples that we should be highlighting for the field, let me know. I don't know if you have our contact information in the books, but it's stephen.hicks@ed.gov. But we'd love to hear those.
And just to clarify too, when we're talking about the $2.5 billion investment in addition, that's in the proposed. For those of you who aren't following it's a very confusing budget situation here in Washington right now. So 2 weeks ago, the Obama administration proposed its budget for fiscal year 12. We still don't have fiscal year 11 figured out. It's in fiscal year 12's budget that these $2.5 billion. It could possibly be, the way I've been looking at the numbers, if we're looking at some of the race to the top investments or I3 that do in fact include some early learning, it could be larger than that. Those are all in this proposed budget for FY12. There's a lot of ifs there, as I'm sure we all recognize, as to whether that will happen. Let's go to Cindy Rice's question.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you both for coming here. And I'm from New Jersey. I'm from the Advocates for Children of New Jersey, and we recognize. It's just makes me feel wonderful to listen to this conversation about how both the Secretary and the President recognize the importance of early learning. We realize, both as policy people and advocates, that this is our time for early learning. We know that. But I have to tell you, if coming from the states, we're scared to death of what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. We are spending so much time. This is such a rich conversation about building a continuum, which we know will work for children, will close the achievement gap. And yet we're so worried about how many children are going to lose, whether they're Head Start slots, their CCDBG slots, all part of this continuum. So I come to you from a state who's being hit both at the state level and the federal level, not different from many of my colleagues here in the room, is to say, for example, how do we tell district administrators to think differently about their Title I money and thinking about it in early learning when they know they're going to be cut? So I bring this to you and ask you, what do we do now in 2011? What should we be doing when the House has just passed the $4 billion cut?
Well, I think that's a good question.
And Ara's not there.
I think it's important to remind ourselves that, and to really own the challenges that we have fiscally. But there are serious challenges in the states and at the federal level in terms of how we move forward, and it means that we're going to need to make some decisions here. Policymakers around budgets, but this is just this area is an area that we know reaps tremendous return on investment, and we believe that there's a way to be responsible stewards of our budget moving forward, and to make fiscally responsible and sound decisions without sacrificing the investments we've made in education. I think you heard the president when he spoke about this in the State of the Union say, you don't have a plane on the tarmac and during takeoff and then drop the engine out from the plane and expect that it's going to fly. I think we've laid out a plan and an imperative around our future economic success and prosperity as a country that I think necessitates greater investments. Not cuts, but increases in education spending. And this is a debate that we're going to have nationally. It's a debate that's going to be playing out across our states and in our communities. It's really an important conversation.
There was in the back, in the middle right here with the red striped shirt.
So those go really hand in hand. And I guess just to echo some of the comments this morning, as I was earlier, as I was listening this morning to people talking about how they've really done a great job in bringing together all their resources from school funding and Head Start and the state pre-K and all of these different resources. And for that, they're rewarded with the challenge now of being hit on across all of those levels, at the local level, at the state level, and the federal level. And I was just wondering if you had any comments or if you're hearing that, and what your strategy is for these, these superstars who are doing such a great job, and for that, they're going to get hit from all sides. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, and thanks for your advocacy. It's really important to have folks that are watching the current state of affairs in the states and at the local level and can help inform the policymaking process here. And the Women's Law Center's done a great job at that. We are hearing the challenges. I mean, I think we hear from educators around the country. We receive letters directly to the president about the challenges that states and local leaders are facing with respect to their budgets, and we know that they're tough times. And I think it's going to necessitate really thinking about and taking a look at kind of current expenditures and where savings can be found, and creative ways of collaborating and partnering and blending funding and moving forward. Ultimately, it's going to necessitate, I think, us at the federal level as well as states taking responsibility to make important investments in key areas. And we're hoping we're going to be able to move forward. I think, again, a strategy for a sound future necessitates sound investments in this space. And, I think when you start to have those conversations with decision makers and they really connect the dots there and think about their own children, their grandchildren, others, I think there's a real opportunity to break through. So we're trying to remain optimistic.
We really are getting tight on time. I'm just going to be able to take one more question. Someone who hasn't spoken yet. Actually, yes, there in the brown. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dana Linane. I'm with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. I was previously in the governor's administration, though, in Michigan when the competitive funding came down through ERA, Race to the Top, whatnot. In a state like Michigan, where we've been under budget deficits for over a decade, structurally, we were pretty successful in supplementing, hiring outside consultants to help apply for these competitive funding structures. We were successful in new energy. We were not successful in Race to the Top. We weren't even close. How can you address sort of this shift that we're seeing and in the president's proposed budget of formula funding to competitive funding? I think it's really, I get that it's, incentivized innovation, but at the same time, how are you going to address disadvantaged communities so they're not falling further behind?
Sure, I'm happy to address that. It's a familiar question. And I really appreciate. I'm from Michigan. I have a lot of family there. I know how what a tough economic climate it is there, in particular in the east part of the state. I think our really theory of action here, certainly with Race to the Top, was to look at what we could do to advance a comprehensive look at reform with a fraction of the dollars that we had available through the Recovery Act. So Race to the Top amounts to about 4%, a little under 4% of the total investment in education made through the recovery, right? We have an over $70 billion investment in K-12 education. There was a $58 billion stabilization fund for states to kind of begin evening out their education budgets, and a number of formula investments from over $10 billion in Title I to $12 billion in IDEA and others. Those were critical investments because it was important to be able to shore up that foundation across the country. But those investments didn't really enable us to take the type of comprehensive approach. And it's not just really to foster innovation, but it's to say, what can we do to have an incentive for states to really rethink their systems, rethink their current modes of funding, and rethink their reform plans and their approach to public education to really achieve results in a very in a rapid way, right? And that was the theory behind Race to the Top. It's in many respects is part of the theory behind the Early Learning Challenge Fund is to think about what we can do to really challenge some of our states to move forward, and it's going to be a high bar and would be a competitive process. It necessitates the investments in the foundation of our programs through child care and Head Start, certainly in the early childhood space, but also in K-12, it means we have to continue investing in Title I, in Title II of ESEA. We have to continue investing in Title III of ESEA. We have not proposed those dollars going competitive. We actually have maintained in our plans for ESEA reauthorization a pretty balanced share of the federal investment in K-12 continuing to remain formula grants. It's over 85% of the dollars in K-12 education that would remain formula. But in areas like investing in Innovation Fund and the Race to the Top and others, we do believe there are certain opportunities through a competitive structure to really incentivize moving toward success in the states and at the local level, and that's kind of why that's our theory behind investments in these types of competitive reforms. Ultimately, we believe both are needed, and certainly we need the capacity building to better enable our states and locals to compete on a fair playing field with respect to these initiatives too, and that's why we've actually, I think, learned a great deal from the Race to the Top applications and that process. And we have a proposal pending in front of Congress for another Race to the Top, but would really incorporate a lot of the learnings we have in terms of how states approached that process to even the playing field in terms of the competition moving forward a bit.
I think that'll be our closing question. I just wanted to reiterate something before I let you all go, and that is that given the funding situation and how many pressures we're going to be put on all of us, I think it's imperative that we do show how much people are willing to come together, how much we're having these conversations about leveraging funding, how many groups, when we're talking about child care and Head Start and the use of Title I dollars, groups are really thinking very hard and thoughtfully about using what exists, because I think that can help to deflect criticism that may come on, oh, well, there are all these different funding streams, and the folks trying to do these kind of continuous systems don't necessarily even know how to use them all. Actually, no. Our point here today, and I think going forward, is that actually we're seeing many models of how to do this, and don't pull the rug out from under us as we're trying to move forward on that. So I just wanted to kind of, it's just occurring to me more and more as I hear these conversations, how important it is to show the kind of cohesiveness. Yes, there's lots we're working out, but the kind of cohesiveness that we can bring to this. Thank you very much, both of you, for your time today.